You can fake a watch, and you can fake a movement. Polish it, engrave it, give it weight, give it presence, and most people will never look any deeper. But what you should never be able to fake is history. And yet, somehow, Panerai did exactly that. Not by lying outright, but by editing, carefully and precisely, leaving just enough truth in place that no one thought to question the rest. Because while the world was buying into a story of Italian military heritage, the reality was sitting somewhere else entirely, in archives, in forgotten invoices, and in details buried so deep they only surface if you already know where to look. This isn't just about one brand. It's about how easily a luxury myth can be built, how long it can survive, and why even the people who discover the truth rarely say anything at all. The watch Rolex built. There is something genuinely magnetic about a watch that looks engineered for combat rather than designed for admiration. The cushion-shaped case, that half-moon lever on the right side of the case that locks the crown down and keeps the water out, the sandwich dial, with its cut-out numerals sitting over a luminous lower plate, so the watch glows from inside rather than just reflecting light. And the size, 47 millimeters, at a time when the watch world had decided that anything over 36 was excessive. These design decisions were not made by a marketing team. They were made by engineers solving real problems for men going underwater in the dark. That is a genuinely compelling origin. The problem is what happened to the telling of it. Walk through the Panerai boutique on any given afternoon, and you will find a brand that presents itself as the inheritor of a proud Florentine tradition. Giovanni Panerai opened his workshop on the Ponte alle Grazie in 1860, an Italian military instrument born from Italian genius. The hang tags, the press releases, the museum-quality display cases inside each boutique. All of it points in the same direction. An independent Italian watchmaking house with deep roots and deeper expertise. Here is the sentence that rewrites all of that. Every single Panerai watch, produced in series between 1936 and 1955, was made entirely by Rolex. The cases arrived from Geneva. The movements, Rolex calibers derived from pocket watch architecture, arrived from Geneva. The caseback engravings carried Rolex reference numbers. Giuseppe Panerai himself, in his own documents from that period, referred to them in writing as Rolex watches. What Panerai contributed was one thing only: the dial. A luminous dial treated with a radium-based compound called radiomir, deadly by modern standards, essential by the 1930s military ones. A dial does not make a watch. It never has. But it makes an excellent foundation for a myth. The numbers tell the rest of the story with a bluntness that the brand's marketing carefully avoids. Between 1935 and 1970, the company delivered approximately 1,600 watches total. To one customer, the Italian Navy. No civilian market, no public presence, and no accumulation of craft across generations of watchmaking families. And then, in 1970, even that single customer stopped ordering. The Navy moved on to newer specifications. Panerai's reason to exist evaporated. For the next 23 years, the company made no watches at all. The lights were off, the doors were closed, and the heritage that modern Panerai sells was sitting in an archive, untouched, waiting to become a story. There's also one chapter of this history that Panerai has never quite figured out how to discuss. Those famous anonymous dials, the California dial, the sandwich dial, the fuzzy brass dial, the ones Panerai has since turned into tribute watches and special editions, describing them as early prototype designs from the late 1930s. The truth is that all three were produced in 1944, not the 1930s. The California dial appeared specifically because aluminium had become impossible to source. The Nazi occupation of Italy had seized every available piece of the material for aircraft and weapons production. Rolex filled the gap with a different dial construction. And some of those watches ended up not only with Italian Navy frogmen, but with Nazi combat swimmers, the Kampfschwimmer, who used them in operations against Allied forces. Panerai later released a limited edition of exactly 1,936 pieces celebrating the California dial. The number was presented as a tribute to 1936, the year of the first Panerai military prototype. The dial of the watch was born in 1944. The edition number was not a coincidence. It was a choice, and a revealing one. Somewhere in a Geneva archive, the Rolex invoice that Giuseppe Panerai filed for those first 19 watches still exists. It lists them as Rolex references. The watch on the Panerai boutique shelf does not. The history was borrowed and reshaped. What Panerai needed next was a face, and the face they found did not find them by accident. The accidental discovery, you have to hand it to them. The story they built around Sylvester Stallone is genuinely good. That man, built like a wall, is in Italy filming a movie called Daylight in September 1995. Between takes, he wanders into a watch shop, maybe in Florence, maybe Rome, depending on which version you read. And there it is. This enormous, strange, military-looking thing is unlike anything he has ever seen. He buys it on the spot, falls in love, and starts handing them out to his friends. Arnold Schwarzenegger gets one, and the whole of Hollywood gets curious. Within a year, a brand nobody outside Italy had heard of becomes the most talked-about watch in the world. Discovery, romance, and authenticity. The luxury industry's most powerful fantasy, that something real can still be stumbled upon, made flesh. It was staged. Almost all of it. There are photos that show Stallone wearing Panerai watches way before the shooting of Daylight started in September 1995. Also, this newspaper article from the 5th of April 1995 proves that Stallone was already wearing a Panerai Luminor logo even before he was offered a role in Daylight. The movie in which he supposedly discovered the watch while shooting had even begun. The timeline does not just wobble under examination, it collapses. What actually happened involves a man named Monty Shadow. Real name Cito Komljenovic, a well-connected Montenegrin photographer with a talent for moving luxury into the right hands. Shadow had discovered Panerai in the early 1990s and brought watches to Stallone and his circle as early as December 1994. When Shadow approached Panerai in the summer of 1995, the company was in genuine distress. The Soviet Union's collapse had gutted Italian military spending. The Navy, their only real client for 6 decades, had gone quiet. The brand had quietly relaunched civilian watches 2 years earlier in 1993, but the civilian world did not yet know they existed. Shadow proposed a solution that Panerai, with very few remaining options, agreed to: deliberate celebrity placement, orchestrated to look like organic discovery. Panerai agreed. They had a few other options. 12 Luminor submersibles were rushed into production specifically for Daylight. Technical drawings went to Shadow. The watches arrived on set. Panerai gifted Stallone multiple reference watches before filming even started, including the very Luminor logo that the brand would later allow him to auction at Phillips, where it sold for $214,200, described in the auction catalog as the watch he wore while discovering the brand. There is something almost poignant about this part of the story. Not for Panerai, but for the collectors who came after. Think about the man who bought his first Panerai in 2003 because he had seen Stallone wearing one and understood it as the watch of someone who did not follow trends, who found things organically, who had taste that could not be manufactured. That man was buying into a story about authenticity. The authenticity itself had been manufactured. The watch was real, but the narrative around the wrist wearing it was not. Stallone eventually moved on. By 2020, he auctioned off the very watch from Daylight. He was later photographed in London, wearing a vintage Rolex instead. The face of Panerai's modern mythology had quietly found a different watch. Richemont, despite everything Stallone had done for the brand, never made him an official ambassador. They paid for product placement. That was the extent of the formal relationship. The man who made Panerai a household name was never actually on the payroll. There is something in that detail that tells you more about the brand than any press release ever has. The next chapter requires a closer look, because Panerai built a naming system specifically designed to stop you from looking. What they named and why. There is a reason serious watch collectors talk about movements the way car enthusiasts talk about engines. The movement is the machine. Everything else, the case, the dial, the crown guard, the strap, is the body wrapped around it. And at the price points Panerai charges, the expectation is not unreasonable. You want to know what is actually powering the thing. Panerai understood this. Their solution was elegant and deeply calculated. When the brand relaunched in 1993 under civilian production and then accelerated under Richemont from 1997, they needed movements. They sourced them from ETA, an established Swiss Ebosch manufacturer whose calibers supply watch brands across every price segment. The ETA 6497, an older, manual winding movement, originally designed for pocket watch architecture, became the backbone of early civilian Panerai production. It is a reliable caliber. There is nothing dishonorable about using it. The question was never about the movement itself. The question was about the label. Panerai named their modified versions with an OP prefix. Officin Panerai, the OPI, the OP2, the OPX. Each name created the impression of something developed specifically for and by the brand, a proprietary caliber family with engineering depth behind it. What the name did not communicate, and was not designed to communicate, was that the base architecture was available to any manufacturer willing to place an order with the same supplier. The name was doing work that the movement could not do on its own. Later, as collector pressure around genuine in-house production intensified and the watch community became more sophisticated about distinguishing borrowed architecture from truly manufactured calibers, Panerai made a significant move. They began developing and naming movements under a P prefix, P9000, P9000, and 10, P9200, suggesting a new era of genuine manufacture watchmaking. Then came late 2020, and this is where the naming story connects to something more concrete. Owners of new P9010 powered watches began posting on forums. Something was wrong. The seconds hand did not stop when they pulled the crown. In mechanical watchmaking, hacking seconds, the function that stops the seconds hand the moment you pull the crown, is not a luxury feature. It is a basic expectation at this price level. Mid-range watches have it. Watches at a fraction of Panerai's price have it. The P9010 had it from launch, and then, silently, it did not. Customer service replies confirmed it. The 2020 update to the P9010 had removed hacking seconds. The movement finishing had been changed simultaneously, from brushed to microblasted, a less expensive process. Both changes reduced what the customer was receiving. Neither was announced. Neither appeared on updated specification sheets initially. The watch looked identical from the outside. The caseback was closed. The only way to find out was to open it, or, for most owners, to read a forum post written by someone who had. This is the observation that almost no coverage makes directly. The closed caseback and the silent downgrade are not two separate decisions. They are the same decision, expressed twice. You close the back so nobody sees what changed. You change what is inside because nobody can see. One enables the other. The infrastructure of concealment was built before the concealment happened. There is a specific smell inside the service center of a high-end watch brand. Machine oil, metal shavings, and the particular clean, antiseptic quality of a room where precision work happens. The watchmaker, who eventually opened one of those 2020 P9010 watches and compared it against the specification the customer had purchased it for, he knew immediately. He had seen it before, but not with Panerai specifically. With brands that have learned that the gap between what the caseback hides and what the customer believes is wide enough to operate in quietly. That watchmaker does not talk about it publicly. The customer whose watch he opened still has not fully decided what to do with the information. The movement changes were quiet. What happened in 2011 was not quiet at all. It involved a caseback engraving that nobody at Panerai should have approved. The Brooklyn Bridge. When Panerai got the limited edition formula right, they made something genuinely worth wanting. The boutique exclusive concept, a watch built for one city, in tiny numbers, carrying that place's identity in its design, is compelling when done with integrity. 150 pieces in New York only, a Luminor case in polished stainless steel, a clean black dial, luminous indices that glow the way early military Panerais were always supposed to glow. And on the caseback, an engraving of the Brooklyn Bridge, so precisely rendered in steel that collectors who saw it in person described stopping completely, every cable suggestion captured. Every structural line was faithfully reproduced in a 2-inch disc of metal by a craftsman who clearly understood what the object was supposed to mean. $5,000 for one of 150. The kind of thing that justifies the entire idea of limited editions existing at all. The watch was called the PAM 318, the Brooklyn Bridge Special Edition. It arrived in the New York boutique in 2009. Then, in 2011, someone opened theirs. Inside, behind that extraordinary caseback, was an ETA 6,497 inches, its most raw and unfinished state imaginable. No Côtes de Genève, blued screws, or pearlage on the bridges. A nickel balance wheel instead of the glucidur balance found in properly specified movements at this price. Not even in cab-lock shock protection, the basic anti-shock system present in movements costs a small fraction of this. A movement that wholesales for around $50, behind a caseback engraved by a skilled artisan, inside a $5,000 watch. The photos appeared on the Panerai forum and spread through the collector community the way a lit match moves through dry paper. The forum response was not measured. Longtime Panerai collectors, people who had defended the brand against accusations of overpricing for years, who had argued that the tool watch identity justified the value proposition, found themselves with nothing left to stand on. One collector posted the now famous observation that replica Panerai movements were more finished than what the brand had just put inside a boutique limited edition. That particular detail circulated for years. It still does. Panerai president Angelo Bonatti issued a public response. He offered to swap the movement in any PAM 318 through the Los Angeles and New York boutiques only. Shipping costs and insurance were excluded from the offer, payable by the customer. And then, in the same statement, he added the sentence that the collector community has never fully forgiven. The movement currently in the watch was not inferior to what was supposed to be there. Read that again. A $50 unfinished movement inside a $5,000 watch, described by the brand president as not inferior. That sentence is not a defense. It is a record of how the brand viewed the people buying their watches. The question that never received a satisfying answer was the simplest one. Was this a mistake or a decision? 150 sealed casebacks. The cheapest available movement from the same supplier Panerai had always used, placed inside without modification or decoration. If nobody had opened theirs, if the forum post had never existed, if the photographs had never circulated, how many of those watches would still contain that movement today, sitting quietly in collections, their owners believing they held something worth $5,000? Panerai called it a production error. No one at Panerai who made the error was publicly identified. No one publicly lost their position over it. The brand recovered within 2 years and continued raising prices. Picture the man who bought his Brooklyn Bridge as a gift to himself, a 40th birthday, the kind of purchase you tell yourself you have earned after years of discipline and delayed gratification. He had chosen it specifically because it felt exclusive. He loved the engraving. He told people about it at dinner. He found out what was inside from a forum thread, the way certain kinds of bad news arrive, suddenly, in public, surrounded by strangers who already know and are already arguing about what it means. He did not return the watch. He put it in the back of the drawer. Not because it had stopped working, because something about what it was had been permanently revised, and the revision could not be undone by a movement swap or a presidential apology or any amount of forum debate. The name of the watch did a kind of quiet, accidental editorial work that nobody at Panerai's marketing department appears to have caught. The Brooklyn Bridge. In American idiom, the phrase, "I have a bridge to sell you," means exactly one thing. Someone on the forum said it plainly when the photos first appeared. Nobody needed the joke explained. What came next was quiet, patient, and in some ways colder, because it required planning that the scandal never did. The engineered icon, Richemont, the Swiss luxury conglomerate that owns Cartier, IWC, Vacheron Constantin, and a constellation of other names, acquired Panerai in 1997 for a figure that industry sources have placed below $1 million. A struggling Florentine instrument supplier with a 23-year gap in civilian production, a celebrity endorsement that had been running for 2 years, and a total output of approximately 1,600 military watches across its entire operational history. That was the asset. Within a decade, individual Panerai watches were retailing for $5,000, $8,000, and $12,000. The transformation was not accidental. It was engineered with extraordinary precision. Understanding how requires understanding what Richemont actually bought. They did not buy a watchmaking tradition, they did not buy manufacturing infrastructure, and they did not buy a customer base. They bought a military story with genuine, dramatic content, a design language so distinctive it was already trademarked, and a gap in the market for oversized tool watches that nobody else had yet thought to fill at luxury prices. The repositioning that followed was methodical. Prices were raised steeply and repeatedly after the acquisition. The military narrative was amplified in every piece of brand communication. The Frogmen, the Alexandria raid, the classified instruments, the Italian Navy heritage, with the Rolex dependency carefully softened into the background, and the 23-year production gap simply not discussed. Limited editions were introduced in escalating numbers, each with its own story, its own restricted quantity, its own reason to feel scarce and therefore valuable. The scarcity, critically, was constructed rather than organic. The modern Panerai watches are scarce because Richemont decides how many to make and then announces a number. An edition of 1,000 pieces is not rare in any meaningful sense. It is a production decision dressed as exclusivity. But in the context of a brand whose marketing points constantly to 1,600 genuine military instruments as proof of its heritage, the numbered editions carry an implied connection to that scarcity that is entirely manufactured. The boutique strategy reinforced this architecture. City-exclusive editions, single boutique releases, pieces available only in Tokyo, only in New York, only in Geneva. Each one is a story. Each one is a reason to feel that ownership placed you inside something selective. The watch community responded exactly as Richemont understood it would, with the collector psychology that makes limited availability feel like recognition rather than marketing. The price escalation ran parallel to all of this. A watch that might have sold for $800 in 1998 was retailing for $4,000 by 2000 and $5,000 and $8,000 by 2015. The movement architecture had not changed proportionally. The case materials had not changed proportionally. What had changed was the density and confidence of the story around the watch, and the story was doing the pricing work that the movement and case could not do on their own. The man who saved for a year to buy a limited edition Panerai in 2018 held something real in his hands. What was not quite real was the feeling that the number meant something independent of the decision that created it. Richemont decided the edition size, the price, and the story. The collector paid for the feeling that these things had been determined by forces beyond commercial calculation. That is the deepest layer of what Panerai engineered. Not a watch, not a brand, but a feeling of discovery inside a system designed, at every level, to produce exactly that feeling. Which leaves the only question that actually matters, the one that sits underneath all of it, and that Panerai's marketing was hoping you never think to ask. What the story cost. There is a number that does not appear on any Panerai price tag, and it is the most important number in this entire story. It is the number that represents the gap between what a watch costs to produce and what a watch costs to own. For Panerai, that gap, at its most conservative estimate, is somewhere between 10 and 25 times the production cost, depending on the reference. $350 to make, $3,500 to $12,000 to buy. The difference between those two numbers is not profit margin in any ordinary sense. It is the price of a story. And the story, the Italian Navy, the Florence workshop, the Stallone discovery, the tool watch soul that no one else can replicate, that story is what you are actually paying for when you buy a Panerai. None of that is unusual. Every luxury brand is, at its core, selling a story. Rolex sells precision and permanence. Patek Philippe sells legacy. AP sells a certain kind of aggressive exclusivity. The story is the product. The watch is the delivery mechanism. Consumers who understand this are not being deceived. They are participating willingly in a transaction that has always been partly about identity and partly about aspiration and only partly about movement architecture. The difference with Panerai is not that they sell a story. The difference is how carefully edited that story has always been. Rolex built the watches, and Panerai took the credit for the heritage, not explicitly, but through the selective placement of emphasis. Stallone found the brand, except he was introduced to it by a photographer running a marketing operation, and Panerai let the other version circulate for 20 years. The movements are branded to sound more proprietary than their origins support. The Brooklyn Bridge had a $50 movement behind a $5,000 caseback. The P9010 was downgraded without disclosure. And through all of it, underneath all of it, the sealed caseback kept spreading, quietly closing off the angle from which the questions would be hardest to answer. Here is what separates this from a simple scandal. The watches are not bad. The design is genuinely distinctive. That enormous cushion case, the crown guard device, the sandwich dial, the sheer physical authority of a 44 or 47 millimeter Luminor on a wrist, there is something there that other watches do not replicate. The Paneristi, the global community of collectors who have organized their watch lives around this brand, are not fools. Many know exactly what is inside the case and love the watch anyway. They are not buying a movement, they are buying a feeling. But there is a collector, and there are many of them, you may know one, who chose Panerai specifically because the story felt different from the usual luxury noise. Not celebrity-driven, not trend-dependent. True, in some essential way, earned. The kind of brand you find rather than the kind that finds you. That collector paid, in some cases, many thousands of dollars for that feeling. They deserved the whole story, not the brochure version. The version with the Rolex invoices, the Monty Shadow emails, the forum photographs, and the customer service replies confirming the 2020 update. Panerai did not build a fraud. They built a frame. They placed the best and most compelling version of their history inside it, lit it beautifully, sealed the back, and charged accordingly. The frame is real. The military history is real. The design is real. The myth around all of it, the independence, the craft, the organic discovery, the manufacturer exclusivity, that was constructed with more intention than any of the watches it was built to sell. And the most remarkable thing, the detail that this entire story keeps returning to, the thing that should stay with you after this video ends, is that it worked. For 30 years, across every scandal and every forum thread and every investigative article, it worked. The prices kept rising, the editions kept selling, the caseback stayed closed. The story kept being told in boutiques around the world, in the cool air and the smell of new leather, by people who may genuinely believe it. That is not the story of a brand that fooled everyone by accident. That is the story of a brand that understood, from the very beginning, that the most durable luxury is not the watch. It is the unwillingness to look too closely at the watch. Stallone knows the whole story. He was there for all of it. The arrangement with Monty Shadow, the watches shipped to set, the deal that became a discovery. He consigned the watch anyway. He let the auction catalog describe the accidental moment anyway. He watched it sell for $214,200 and said nothing to correct it. That is not hypocrisy. That is the final lesson Panerai teaches, and it is the one the brand never had to manufacture. Once a story reaches a certain quality, even the people who know it is constructed stop wanting to interrupt it. The myth survived everyone who knew it was a myth, including the man who started it. If this changed how you see the watch on your wrist, or the story behind the brand on your wrist, like this video and subscribe. There is more where this came from.